Ladies and gentlemen, so in this live stream, we are going to be talking about Hitler, but I here. Okay, so we are live, just making sure we are live. All right, I just want to be very clear that in this video, we are not promoting Hitler. We're not promoting any hate group or hate ideology or Nazism or anything like that. That is not what we're doing. I know that's what it may seem like, but we are not about to do a Kanye West. Hitler was a very evil guy. He basically did some atrocious things, and anyone who's supporting him, I think, is a very disgusting person. Hitler is somebody who should be denounced. However, I can say all those things and at the same time say factually that he wasn't a monster. Right? He was not a monster. Hitler was not a monster. The reason why I'm doing this live stream is because this is yet again trying to illustrate, when we look at why things are as bad in this country as they are, right? Speaking about things like the fact that we have this lunatic as a president of the United States. The fact that can happen has to do with our schools that are failing us and has to do with the lack of critical thinking of people in this country. And this is yet another example. The fact that you cannot in this country, I'm not making an absolute statement, but in general, you cannot speak about Hitler in this country. A lot of Americans are incapable of speaking about Hitler. Why is that? Because they view him as a monster, and I'm going to illustrate how they're wrong. He was not a monster. He was not a demon. Hitler was a human being. That's what he was. He was born into this earth as a human being. That is how he started his life. It is a bit childish and simplistic to think of him as a one-dimensional character. And that's the way people think in this country. They look at him as like he's the guy that did genocide. That's it. Who's Hitler? The guy that did genocide. That's it. It's nothing else. So he didn't even have a childhood. He wasn't a baby. He wasn't a young boy. He wasn't a teenager. All it is he's a guy that did genocide. But that is not true. He did a lot of other things before he got to that point. The relevance here is, if we were to go back in time and we were to, imagine ourselves to be people back in those days living in Germany. Would you have been able to see the warning signs? Would you have been raising an alarm about this person before he started killing people, before he got extreme? Would you have recognized the warning signs? And when you think about that for a second, if someone somewhere else in this world were headed down the same path as Hitler, would you be able to recognize this person before they get to the point where we're at the point of no return and things get very bad? I think a lot of people, the answer is no, right? Why? Because they lack the context, they lack the let's call it resolution in terms of how they see Hitler. If you see Hitler as a binary thing, as a one-dimensional thing, it's just all he is just this monster, right? Then that means, what did they say about history? If you don't understand it, you're bound to repeat it, or something like that. If you are missing the resolution, in terms of all the details of his childhood, how he was as a teenager, like what led him to that path. If you're missing all of that resolution, because all you can see again, you're just one dimensional, you just see the guy that did genocide, then you're going to be unable to recognize a person in the future who might follow that path, right? How can you learn from the history if you don't know the history? And the history is not just genocide and killing of the Jews. That is not the history. That is part of the history, right? Again, if you have a lack of awareness of the other parts, then you're not going to be able to recognize someone who might be headed down that path until it's too late. Like when someone, ends up starting to do genocide, is that the point where you're going to be like, oh my goodness, this person has become a Hitler, right? Is that when you're going to, because again, if you use that logic, if you go back in time, if you're in Germany and you use that logic, then you're going to sit by and watch this guy rise to power and grow and get more influence, right? And you're going to sit by because the only thing you know about Hitler is genocide. So until the genocide start, you're sitting there like, oh, there's some weird stuff about this guy, but he hasn't done any genocide, so he's not Hitler. And anyone who's comparing him to Hitler, you're nuts, right? Hitler was not a monster. Hitler was not a demon. Hitler was a human being, right? There was a path that he took that led him to his final destination, right? The monster. I see even that. Let's stick with the accuracy. I was going to say the monster that he became. He didn't become a monster. He became a human being who conducted monstrous acts, right? It was the actions that he took. But ultimately, he was nothing more than a human, right? The danger is in the behavior. The danger is in the path. So I'm sure many of you know why I'm saying this and where we're headed with this. But it was very important that I covered those points before I moved into the next level. But before we move to the next level, again, I want to ask you guys, 1 second, let me make sure the chat is open. I want to ask you guys, we've seen a lot of troubling people in our lifetimes, a lot of bad people, right? At different levels. Question to you is, get out of the way. Question to you is, at what point in time, if you see someone that is exhibiting troubling behavior, at what point in time would you think it is appropriate to start drawing parallels with Hitler? Now, again, most people would struggle with answering that question because, again, if you see him as a one-dimensional character, you're just thinking about death and destruction and whatever. But I implore you to get out of that sort of simpleton thought process. Let's go beyond what our education system has left us with in terms of the lack of ability to think deeply, and let's think deeply. Let's think deeper than just genocide. At what point in time would you think it's appropriate to start looking at someone's behavior and saying, they seem to be headed down a path that is heading in a certain direction where, what Hitler ended up with? And also, let's think a little deeper, right? So if you see someone that is behaving in a way that's reminding you of Hitler before the violence, if you see someone that's behaving in that way, right? Understand that there will never be another Hitler, right? There will never literally be another Hitler. There will never be, well, I shouldn't say this. I can't say that factually. I can't see the future, but very unlikely that there's going to be another person who, and I don't just mean literally Hitler, but I mean in terms of the exact actions that he took, the exact path that he took, the way he did things, his exact words, right? There is very unlikely to be another one who is going to behave in exactly the same way. Again, let's get out of this cartoon thought process, simpleton thought process, very simple. Let's think a little bit deeper than that. A person who might end up being a person who is like Hitler would only be like Hitler. They wouldn't be literally. So, meaning maybe there's violence, but it doesn't get to the point of a genocide, right? There's going to be differences, right? It's, for example, think about think about the most extreme serial killer in the United States that we've had in the past. I can't think of names right now. I don't know the history enough to give a name, but think about the most deadly serial killer that we had in this country. I'm sure that other serial killers who, did a lot of killing, I'm sure there's some parallels, right? But they wouldn't literally be the same. For example, we had, I guess, Jeffrey Dahmer would probably be someone that I can think of right now. So if I remember correctly, he was eating people or something like that. There could have been a certain thing about who he was eating or whatever it is. You can't expect, so I'm going to wait until I find someone that's doing exactly what he was doing. Maybe, I don't know how he was choosing people to eat. You know what I mean? Or maybe what his hobbies were. Like, you got to think deeper than that. What you want to look at the core parts of Jeffrey Dahmer's personality. Get it more generalized and not get harp on the specifics, right? We're not talking about a copycat, right? A copycat serial, even though that's a thing. You might have people who try to copycat him, right? But generally speaking, you want to look at the fundamentals of his personality, his behavior, and try to make it more generalized to create a profile, which is something they do in law enforcement, at which you could utilize to perhaps predict someone who might be heading in that direction. So maybe there's someone that you know in your life who a lot of things are similar to Jeffrey Dahmer. That's not meaning they're going to end up doing the exact same thing, but maybe if there's enough parallels that seem similar enough, that can get you alerted towards, let's be a little bit more observant of this person. Let's if you see something, say something on this person, because if you don't make the parallel and you just say that person's kind of weird, then maybe they end up actually killing people and no one realizes until it's too late because you didn't get to that extra level of alertness where it's kind of like, okay, this person has a lot of troubling behavior. It's him going on that pattern. Number one, maybe we can get this person help, right, to avoid where they might be headed. But number two, context. So you have a person that has a lot of similarities to like a Jeffrey Dahmer type person. And then there's some fishy things that happen, like someone goes missing that's close to them or was seen with them. If you make the parallel, then you could be a little bit more aggressive in terms of like, okay, we need to find out where this person is, what's happening here, like let's get really aggressive here. Versus if you wait until they start killing people or you become aware of it to actually start really paying attention, then you might miss it, right? A lot of signs are similar. A lot of the behavior is similar, but you just sit by and you just kind of like, oh, they're just kind of a weird person. And then meanwhile, because you're not paying that much attention, they kill one person, and the next person, and the next person. And then it comes out and you're like, oh my goodness, I knew the person was weird. So, case in point. And perhaps you need to do the research. And we're going to talk a little bit about a little bit of the parallels in terms of what Hitler was before he became the monstrous type of person that he became. But if you actually educate yourself on who Hitler was as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, things he did, things he went through, then you could develop a profile. And it's not to say that someone who goes through those similar things are going to become what he became, but we at least know the warning signs in terms of we know when to be concerned. and when to be more vigilant. When we see parallels with someone else, we're like, okay, they may not be going exactly where Hitler went or going anywhere near that, but this is a person who is exhibiting enough parallels that we should probably pay a little bit more attention to this person, right? But obviously, to do that, you would have to know the history, right? So, as I'm sure many of you probably already figured out the point of this video and where we are headed, whenever people like J.D. Vance refer to Trump as the new Hitler, and other right-wing figures refer to him as Hitler or Hitler-like or becoming a dictator. I know we like to only pay attention to when people on the left or liberals say that, and we like to ignore when conservatives say that. But if we look at them saying these types of things, right? A lot of people, and it's not just people on the right, you have people who are centrists and liberals who, okay, I mean, Trump's crazy and whatever, but let's not be ridiculous. Trump hasn't killed anyone. He's not doing a genocide. Again, you see how we get back to the simpleton logic, right? The cartoon way of viewing things where Hitler is just a one-dimensional thing. He just did genocide. So until someone else is doing genocide, how dare you compare them to Hitler? Hitler was a human being, right? Let's go through some of the parallels between Hitler and our man Donald Trump, who is certainly not committing genocide and certainly hasn't done anything anywhere near to the end, but there was a beginning and middle before we get to the end with Hitler, right? So let's look at the beginning and middle of Hitler before he became violent, just like how Donald Trump has not become violent yet, and he may not ever become violent, but let's do the comparison, right? Birth and family. So, Donald Trump, born in 1946 in Queens to a wealthy real estate family. So Hitler, a little bit of a contrast. First contrast is he was born in 1889 to Austria to a middle class family. So he was not born to a, holy crap, I'm like on a hill here. He's not born to money. So it was a middle class family. He did have an authoritarian father, which I think there's some parallels with Trump. I don't know if they refer to him as authoritarian, but he was definitely sort of a very strict father. Anyway, so childhood. So Trump grew up privileged, described as assertive and dominant. He attended a military academy due to behavior issues. So Donald Trump had behavior issues. I at one time had behavior issues as well, right? I didn't turn out to be Hitler. I don't think anyone thinks I'm going to become Hitler. So it's interesting. Just because someone had behavior issues and Hitler had behavior issues doesn't mean that the person's going to become Hitler. It seems that it's more about the complete picture, right? It's not just one thing. It's not just, he did genocide and he didn't do genocide. Like, let's think a little bit deeper than that. This is a parallel. This is a data point. However, before we make a parallel, before we get concerned, we would need much more than just Hitler was troubled and so was Trump. But this is a data point. This is a parallel. Hitler had difficulty in terms of the relationship with his father, which ironically I as well had, so I guess I'm Hitler. Dreamed of being an artist, but struggled with discipline. So we have two young kids that struggle with discipline. Okay. Not really a case at all at this point. Let's continue. Education. Studied at... Why is it all of a sudden I'm rolling down? I wasn't rolling before. What the hell's going on? Hitler's ghost is trying to do something to me here. Education. So studied. So Trump studied at Wharton School. He had some troubles there. They actually went through the trouble of hiding his grades because I don't think the grades were very impressive, but he was not known to be very studious, shall we say. Let him tell it. He was great. He did great. Right. Show us the grades, Donald. Hitler, on the other hand, he was rejected from art school twice. Sorry about that. He later developed an interest in politics and history. I don't know that Trump had an interest in politics and history at a young age. He obviously had an interest for decades leading up to his presidential run in 2016. But I don't know when the interest in politics started. But he definitely had an interest in politics for a very long time. I just don't know if it goes back this far. Hitler seems to have picked up on politics earlier than Trump. But again, that may be false because I do not know when Trump. What the hell is going on? This chair, holy crap. Anyway, so early career. So take over the family business, expanded his real estate empire, and cultivated a media persona. So that is obviously Donald Trump. In contrast, and some would say to this point, Hitler has somewhat a better trajectory, or Hitler might have been a better man at this point than Donald Trump, ironically or interestingly, based on, at this point, rather than being Mr. Bone Spurs, right, and getting away from his duty to serve the country, Hitler actually served in World War One, gained recognition for bravery. Donald Trump did not gain any recognition for bravery, but he struggled to find work post-war. So Hitler, unlike Trump, actually served his country. As far as I know, I'm not a Hitler historian. Honorably, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have any information that there was anything bad about his career in the military, in general. So anyway, moving on. Media and branding. So Trump becomes a celebrity through The Apprentice and self-promotion, calling and acting as if he's a different person and all kinds of antics. Hitler became a fiery speaker, gaining attention with speeches on German nationalism. Nationalism. Who do we see focused on nationalism in this country? Not one person, but a group of people. Anyway, public persona. So Trump, brash, self-promotional, expert at manipulation. Expert at manipulating media, branding himself as a deal maker and a winner. Hitler, on the other hand, charismatic. I think people describe Trump as charismatic. Developed a skill for dramatic oration, appealing to nationalist sentiments. I think some people would definitely attribute that to Donald Trump for sure. I don't know. Some would probably say that Hitler was a better speaker than Trump. But Trump is quite effective at his target audience, and definitely quite dramatic in his oratory techniques, in terms of, I mean, the stuff that he talks about, they're going to destroy this country and this and that. And I mean, he really, really gets super, super aggressive and dark for sure. But I think Hitler was more a traditional speaker in the sense that we, when we look at someone that we regard as a good who was a good speaker, I think Hitler would be more in line with that, as opposed to Trump is a bit unorthodox. But the impact of his speech and how aggressive he is in his speech, and the nationalist sentiments certainly parallel for sure. Early political involvement. First explored politics in the 1980s. Flirted with presidential runs before 2016. So yeah, as we said, we did that For a long time, he was talking politics. Hitler, on the other hand, joined the German Workers' Party in 1919, quickly became its leading figure. So this guy joined this party and pretty much took it over. Rise to fame. Trump built a populist movement with strong branding, MAGA, Make America First. I'm sorry, the America First movement, rather. Um, this is where things are starting to merge between the two characters. Um, so Hitler took over the Nazi Party, like Trump took over the Republican Party. He was focusing on nationalist themes like Germany first. So Trump, America first, Hitler, Germany first. Now, if we want to be bad faith, and this can go both ways, one second, we can say that there's nothing wrong with being America first and putting the country first, and you should consider your country before other countries, right? I mean, why would you want to do other than that? However, I think that's an oversimplification, right? Putting your country first and being patriotic is not quite the same thing as when you're getting into being a nationalist. I think people in good faith recognize the difference between the two, right? I think most Americans are to some degree America first, right? I mean, let's be real. Do you really think there's many people in this country that believe that other countries come before America? Like, how many people in this country do you think generally feel that we should consider other countries before ourselves? We should consider what's happening in other parts of the world before we consider ourselves. Now, some would say it's actually more than I think because they look at stuff like Ukraine, but supporting the Ukraine war and supporting Ukraine's defense of itself is not quite the same thing as putting Ukraine before us. Now, I think you could make a good faith argument that our Congress is Israel first, right? Because look at what Joe Biden did, right? I'm sure Joe Biden didn't want to lose the election, but he put Israel so much before our country that he actually, I wouldn't say that's the reason why he lost, but that was a significant part of it, right? He was willing to risk losing the election. In his mind, losing the election would mean so much destruction for the country under a second Trump term, right? So recognizing that danger, he prioritized Israel, right? His entire base was saying, we don't agree with what you're doing. We don't agree with what's happening in Gaza. And he was just like, I don't care, right? So if you want to say there's people in this country that are not America first, you look at Congress, and that's a bipartisan thing. So we're not picking on Democrats or Biden. Congress in general rejected the American people, saying, listen, man, what we're doing here is wrong, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, let's not get too stuck on that. Cult of personality. So Trump developed a devoted base that saw him as a political savior, right? Hitler cultivated an image as Germany's savior. Again, you could oversimplify this and be bad faith and be like, what's so wrong about saving America? All right, you can do that if you want to, but if you think a little bit deeper than that, it's a little bit more than just saving the country, right? I'm sure Joe Biden thought he was also saving the country when he ran for office, but it's not quite the same thing. The cult of personality, the only I can save the country type of rhetoric, I don't think we quite got that from Uncle Joe. So, rhetoric and messaging. So, Donald Trump used grievance and politics, grievance, I don't know why I said grievance, grievance and politics, vilified the media, blamed outsiders for national decline. Hitler used grievance, politics, blamed, or grievance politics. I don't know why I put it like it's two different things. They both use grievance politics. Um, Hitler blamed the Jews, right? Trump is blaming the immigrants, right? They're destroying this country. There's an invasion at the border. Hitler was doing the same thing with the Jews. He was also doing it with socialists. Donald Trump also goes after socialists. He even calls people who are not socialists. He's so anti-socialism that he would refer to somebody like Joe Biden. Hey! This guy's eating my microphone cable. Um, so anti-socialist, anti-Jew, Trump anti-socialist, anti-immigrant. Turning point. Turning point. So at this point, I don't think either man has done anything crazy. No one has been killed. Yeah, these are just let's just call it interesting characters at this point. Nothing really crazy has happened yet. Uh, so let's stop at this point. So if we were to go back in time and look at Hitler at this point, how many people in this country would be concerned? How many people would see, sort of warning flags, and how many people would have been sort of, you know, spidey sense or whatever at this point versus, yeah, I mean, he's just a politician, whatever, right? Kind of like how people look at Donald Trump, right? Um, Hitler was just a regular guy up until this point. Some some peculiar parts of his personality, some concerning parts of his personality, some warning flags, right? But at this point, he hadn't done anything really crazy. The turning point for Donald Trump, a big turning point, comes in 2016. Increasingly, I'm sorry, not 2016. He was elected in 2016, and he became increasingly combative. Um, I'm sorry. His increasingly combative rhetoric led us up to January 6th, right? The January 6th insurrection. So long has this country stood, and no one, absolutely no one, attacked our capital. Our capital was not breached for so long. We hadn't had anything like that um, after, I guess I would say, after the Civil War. Um, we have been secure. Our capital has been secure. Um, and it took Donald Trump and his movement for that capital to be breached and desecrated in such a way that it was. That is what Donald Trump brought us. Now, if you didn't get the warning signs about Trump being dangerous and heading down a dangerous path, January 6th should have been the moment where you were like, okay, wait a minute. He said a lot of crazy things, and I had some concerns, but January 6th and how he behaved on that day, how he behaved on the days leading up to it, how he's behaved ever since, relevant to it. That should have been the moment where you're like, right? Hitler, on the other hand, 1923, Bear Hall Putsch, I don't know how to pronounce that, attempted coup leading to brief imprisonment. So, Hitler had his January 6th moment. However, I believe it was a little bit more successful even though it did lead to him being briefly imprisoned. But their coup situation, I think, makes January 6th look like a little bit of a joke. But it's the same kind of a thing, right? These are the same types of things. January 6th insurrection, the Beer Hall Putsch attempted coup. Um, you could accurately describe January 6th as an attempted coup. If you're bad faith or just ignorant, you would say, how is it a coup? The military wasn't involved, but as I've pointed out many times, there are many different types of coups. A military coup is only one type of coup. Obviously, the military was not involved, so January 6th was not a military coup. But there are coups that do not involve violence. January 6th actually did involve violence, right? So it can be a coup without even violence, right? So it definitely could be accurately described as a form of coup. And Hitler had his own coup. So beyond that, this is where we will stop, because after this coup that Hitler did, things turned very dark. And obviously, we know where things ended up. If we are to imagine that Donald Trump is not Hitler, but a person like Hitler was before what came next. So if Donald Trump is going to become someone who's like Hitler, and you imagine that he is at that stage in his development before things get really, really dark. If that is the case, would you be able to recognize this fact and be sort of I don't know what I was looking to say, but basically, would you be able to recognize that fact? Or I guess I could pose a question. What in terms of an analysis of Trump becoming not literally Hitler, doing exactly what Hitler did, but becoming a person like him, what sign would you need to see before you would get really concerned that he might be headed down a similar path? Like, what would it take? Because it can't be a genocide. It can't be him ordering the arrest of all the Democrats, right? It can't be him ordering the FBI to arrest all the leaders of all the media, so go after CNN, MSNBC. It can't be that, right? I mean, if you wait until it gets to that point, it might very well be too late. Because think about in Hitler's trajectory. What if people waited until the bodies started dropping? At that point, Hitler already had a strong cult following. He had developed a lot of power. He had taken over a political party. He had started dismantling the government. So in terms of the safeguards that you could use to stop him, a lot of that stuff he had already dismantled. So if you wait until things get that extreme, you might wait until it's too late. So this is a question you need to ask yourself, right? And ignore people who are bad faith and extreme and trying to say Trump is literally Hitler, and just getting to that extreme. Ignore them. Just think about yourself and your position. Trump is a human. Hitler was a human. Therefore, Trump being a human, he's capable of doing what humans are capable of doing. Hitler is an example of the kinds of things that humans are capable of doing, right? What would it take for you to get concerned that he might be headed down that path, right? And again, If the answer is any of the crazy things I mentioned, I'm sorry to say you are possibly going to wait until it's too late. If you are really partisan, if you're really tribal, you're going to avoid answering that question and you're going to focus on drawing parallels between Biden and Hitler and say, well, you know, what about when Biden did this and Biden did that? Okay, fine. Maybe, well, Biden's out of power now, but maybe Biden was headed on a path where he was going to be, like JD Vance says to Trump, the next Hitler, right? So, what action would Joe Biden have to have taken before you're like, I'm really concerned he seems to be headed on that path, right? So it's not about, it's not a competition, Biden versus Trump, who's the one that's more. Trump's the one in power. Trump's the one that has a cult of personality. A lot of stuff that's happening in our country, it's all under Trump. So, what actions, right, for the guy who's relevant now? He's the one in power. He's the one that's doing stuff, right? So he's the one we need to. If someone is going to become, if someone's going to potentially become the next Hitler, it would need to be someone in power who I mean, right now the way Trump he got rid of all the inspectors generals, he is replacing he replaced all or replacing or replaced the tops of all the the FBI, all these agencies, and didn't put just people who he likes. He put loyalists, so people who weren't even fully qualified, people who were, much less qualified than I think anyone in history. Right? These are historically unqualified people. So clearly the priority was loyalists. So if Trump were to decide to take a Hitlerian path, the things he's doing now would enable him to be able to even have success. Like so let's say, for example, let's say that Trump was Hitler reincarnate, right? So Hitler reincarnated as Donald Trump, and all along he's been secretly playing the part of Donald Trump, but he's really Hitler, right? If that were the case, right, the actions that Trump is taking now would be perfect for what's to come next. And I would think that Hitler would be smart enough to not repeat exactly what he did in the past. For example, he recognizes this is a different age, information era, so you need to be a little bit subtle in how you do things, right? You need to be a little bit strategic in how you do things. So if he was going to go down that path, he has already opened a lot of doors that would allow him to be able to pull this off. So it's very dangerous that this is a reality, right? So I think it's important that we definitely examine any parallels and really do some introspection in terms of looking at red flags and really think about what's happening right now. Because if we're wrong, right, if we're wrong and we sit by idly and we don't recognize the threat, by the time we do, it might be too late. And once again, as I said earlier, it's not that if Donald Trump is headed on a similar path, that it would ever get to the point of genocide. I mean, we could imagine a variation of outcome where, let's say he just wants to become like a dictator type of character. So he somehow takes over the media like he's trying to do right now. I mean, he's bullying them around and suing them and whatever and making them afraid to challenge him. So let's say he gets the media on. He's gotten all the agencies, federal agencies under his thumb. He put loyalists in place. Let's say he does a similar thing to where he's now controlling the media, right? He's got full control over the Republican Party. If he continues to do this, We could see him in the future not doing a genocide and killing a bunch of people and arresting the Democrats, but you could see him in the future getting to the point where he takes away a lot of our rights, a lot of our freedoms of speech. People get to the point where they're afraid. The media is afraid, and then general citizens are afraid. So he starts doing some very bad things, and they're not protests, right? Because of actions he's taken in the past. People are afraid. Like maybe he starts using the military to go after protesters. So now it's kind of like a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, why is he doing this? But it's already gone too far to where people are like, I'm not going to go protest. I'm not going to get shot. I'm not going to end up in Guantanamo Bay, right? So this right gets taken away and that right gets taken away. And so, again, we're not doing genocides and all the Hitler stuff and people in ovens or whatever, right? Let's not be ridiculous. He's not a one-dimensional person. He didn't just do one thing. And someone who is very dangerous, as Hitler was, doesn't have to go down the exact same path, do the exact same types of things, but would still be absolutely very dangerous and would result in a lot of people dying, but maybe not necessarily through, genocide. It could be simply something like, for example, the next pandemic occurs. He's already suppressing information from CDC to us right now because of bird flu. Let's say there's a big pandemic that occurs and he does the same kind of thing, suppresses information. Anyone that tries to put out information saying that there's a pandemic happen, he says it's fake information and it's propaganda, and he does an executive order that makes it illegal somehow. I mean, just the same way he's doing all the crazy stuff he does now. He does some crazy thing where he pulls it off to where everyone's afraid to call it out. And we see a lot of people dying. Hospitals are overflooded. And it's kind of just being done in the dark type of thing. Nobody in the media talks about it because, Trump has control of the media. So people are just dying and dying and dying. And it's almost like, no one's talking about it. No one's doing anything about it. No one's pushing back. It's just kind of happening. These spineless politicians in Congress are just worried about their jobs, worried about their families. So they're not trying to challenge him, and it's just happening, and we're just dying, and millions of people die, right? So no one was put in an oven. There was no genocide, right? But yet millions of people die because Trump goes down a path of dictatorship and ultimate control, basically becoming a king, right? So again, it doesn't have to be exactly what happened in Germany, but it can absolutely be something that is very dangerous for us, and it can result in a lot of death, a lot of destruction. Again, I ask the question, at what point in time does Trump take an action where you would be seriously and aggressively concerned about the direction that he's headed in terms of becoming someone like that? Or let's put Hitler aside, just becoming a dictator and potentially taking away your rights, potentially doing some very destructive things to the country. What would be the warning signs for you? Right? Something to think about. I don't know why. Environmental coffee house. I don't know why. It said there was a comment and then I couldn't see it. In the comments, I guess it's a delay or something. Nobody's born a monster, I don't think. Right, exactly. I'm not going to be able to stay. I'll have to rewind to watch this later. As always, I'm sure it's pretty good and compelling. Yeah, I'm gonna end the live stream anyway. I think I've made my points. I'm gonna try to summarize the points that I made because this is a lot to digest, of course. And I think a lot of people in this country, you probably have never taken the time to really think about, who Hitler really was. I'm sure most people, for most of your life, you've thought of him just as the genocide guy. You've thought of him as his worst, right? And my message to you is it's very dangerous to do that. There's a lot of things that happened in his life before that, as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, as a soldier. Right? There's a lot of things that happened before he got to his final destination. And I think if you don't if you're not aware of these things, you don't learn about these things, you don't educate yourself from these things, forget about Trump. Somebody in the future who might head in that direction, you're not going to be able to benefit from history, right? Because you're waiting for the genocide, right? If you're waiting for the genocide, you haven't learned from history, because the genocide, that was at the end, right? A lot happened before that. You need to learn about the history of what led to that, right? So you can know the warning signs. That's the most important thing. It's not important for you to remember and know about the genocide, just that, right? Okay, so genocide happens. Well, okay, I know what this is. I know about Hitler and he did genocides. Okay, that's great, but that might be too late. That might be too late. Learn a little bit more about what came before. So again, forget about Trump. Could be somebody in the future. Could be who replaces him. Could be a Democrat. This is Debate Me channel. Debate me in the comment section below. Click on the like button, subscribe, smash that bell. Be well. Hitler was not a monster. He just behaved like one. Dramatic music. That's my X-Files. That's horrible. That was my favorite show, by the way, back in the day.